We're going to test the ATI Radeon. In this video, the plan is to in this video, I'm hoping maybe we get to test the. So a lot went wrong when testing this video card. All in all, I tested 4 different systems, I believe. With old computer parts, it's not always smooth sailing, so I have a lot to share and you might find this video interesting. It might save you some headaches for your own projects. 20 years ago, in 2003, Anantech reviewed a bunch of budget video cards, and the Radeon 9600 SE as well as the NVIDIA GeForce FX 5200 Ultra, they both received recommendations. And here we have the card, the ATI Radeon 9600 SE. Passively cooled, this is very nice, makes it very reliable, no fans that can collect dust and fail over time. It's also noiseless. AGP interface right here. Let's have a look at all the ports. We have a VGA port here. This one gives you composite and S-video out to connect to a old school TV DVI, and you can use a DVI to VGA dongle to connect a second VGA display. So let's have a look at the very first system I put together. A beautiful mainboard from Asus. This one is for socket 939. We have the model number right here. It's the A8V Deluxe with a VIA chipset. Supports dual channel memory. We have 2 512 megabyte modules from Kingston, and the processor, it's an Athlon 64 4000 Plus. It had the latest BIOS version already, but I flashed it again just to be sure. It turned on just fine, and I could go into the BIOS and configure all the settings also without any issues, but the SATA ports, they gave me issues. Firstly, we have the SATA ports from the VIA chipset. They are not compatible with modern SATA 3 drives. They only work with SATA 1 drives, so I couldn't use that one. And then we have a RAID controller from Promise, so I used these two and the drive got detected, so that was fine, but I had no success installing Windows XP. Windows XP, even when trying different SATA storage packs, simply would not pick up the storage device. So as a workaround, I'm using a IDE to SATA adapter. This one is from StarTech. We've been using that in many projects and has worked beautifully in this situation. So I was able to install Windows XP without any issues. This board has an annoying bug. If you have a USB hard drive connected, doesn't matter what boot options you have configured in the BIOS, it will simply not boot from the main storage. So every time I shut down the machine, I had to pull out the USB hard drive and then plug it back in, which was quite annoying. On the Windows XP desktop, we're getting full HD resolution out of the box. So Windows XP seems to have some basic drivers for this video card integrated. As always, I'm loading the Snappy driver installer Origin that detects all the devices and installs all the drivers, but I deselect the drivers for the graphics card and for the sound card. Next up was installing Catalyst 10.2. This is the latest driver for this video card. You can still download it from the AMD website, and that step also worked fine. But I ran into issues when trying to install the drivers for the sound card. I tried the Sound Blaster X-Fi. This is the Sound Blaster X-Fi Extreme Music, and what happened after installing the drivers, it would simply freeze when trying to boot into Windows. I then tried another sound card, this one here. This is the Audigy 2ZS, but it gave me the same issue. And after swapping PCI slots, swapping maybe 3 sound cards, I gave up and I moved on to a different motherboard. This is the system that ended up working beautifully with Windows XP. We have been using this system in the past. It's a motherboard from ASRock, the 775i65G. Very interesting. It combines the newer LGA 775 socket with the Intel AGP chipset, the Intel 865, and excellent compatibility and performance. We're using the same memory, 2 512 megabyte DDR400 modules from Kingston. The processor is an Intel Pentium dual core, so much faster than the Athlon 64. And here everything worked fine. I didn't have to use the ID to SATA adapter because the SATA ports from Intel also are very compatible, work without issues with the SATA 3 SSDs. In the BIOS, as always, I load the BIOS defaults and then I disable some onboard resources that I'm not using. But apart from that, there was really not much I had to change. Windows XP installed without any issues. Snappy driver installer Origin is next, installing all the drivers apart from the Audigy sound card drivers and apart from the Radeon graphics drivers. Then we're loading the .NET 2 framework because the ATI drivers, they require that. The ATI drivers are next, Catalyst 10.2, and then the Daniel K Audigy support pack drivers version 8.1. The driver has everything we expect. We can change the resolution, of course. We have GPU scaling. We can toggle settings for anti-aliasing, anisotropic filtering, and VSync. So now let's run some benchmarks. In 3D Mark 2001 SE, we're getting 7,493. So that seems to be quite low. And in 3D Mark 03, the situation doesn't get much better. 1,977. With that in mind, let's test some games. We have Far Cry and we're using medium details because this video card is a budget card and it only has 128 megabytes of VRAM. So here we can see Far Cry across various resolutions. At 640 by 480, the performance is not too bad, but then it quickly drops off. Even at 800 by 600, we're getting lower than 60 FPS and the higher resolutions are not really playable. In Doom 3, the situation gets worse. We're using medium details because that's the recommended setting for 128 megabytes of VRAM. And even at 640 by 480, we are barely getting 30 FPS. So Doom 3 is a struggle for this graphics card. So a big reason why the performance is so low has to do with the memory interface. It's only 64-bit, which is half of what the full Radeon 9600 has. The RAM is also clocked pretty low, so all that results in a fairly low performance. And then I'm testing a few games. Now this game, Screamer 4x4, I've been playing quite a lot recently. It's from 2001, developed by Channel 42 software developer. This is the GOG release. You just install it on a modern machine and then copy the folder onto your retro PC. It supports OpenGL, Direct3D and the nGlide API for Voodoo cards. It's an off-road racing simulation, quite a fun game with an interesting physics engine, and yeah, definitely a game I can recommend. And here I'm testing Thief 2, and this is surprising. Radeon cards are known to have issues with table fog, but in Thief 2 under Windows XP, yeah, fog is displaying perfectly fine on this video card. So this will be interesting to check later when we're testing Windows 98. And now we're testing a game that I haven't played before. It is X Beyond the Frontier. And yeah, it's something I wanted to do recently, spend more times playing games, not rushing through games and just quickly testing the performance, but actually sitting down, reading the manual, figuring out the controls, and yeah, spending a bit more time playing the games and sharing my opinions with you. So this game launched in 1999 by Egosoft, and it's the first of many games from the X series. And I thought it's a space sim, like a space shooter like Wing Commander, but it turned out differently. We'll get to that later. It supports the joystick. I use a Logitech joystick. It worked fine, but the throttle for some reason ended up not working. It does show up in the Windows XP control panel, but in the game it just doesn't work. And yeah, initially it starts off with a training mission where you learn all the controls and everything, and then you're testing a jump drive, but the jump goes wrong and you end up in a totally different location, somewhere deep in space, and there's an alien ship which puts you into debt, and you need to trade your way out of the situation. But trading is not really my thing. I find it a bit boring. It's quite slow paced as well, and not quite what I was hoping for. I was hoping for a fun space shooter like Wing Commander, where you can just, blast enemies in space, but it's more a trading sim. Maybe later it develops into a space shooter, I'm not sure. Eager to hear your opinions on this game, and if you have any recommendations about space shooters, leave them down below in the comment section. So Windows XP performance was not that impressive. What about Windows 98? This is my go-to test system for Windows 98. We have a mainboard from Gigabyte. It's the GAK8VM800M socket 754. Processor is a Athlon 64 3400. We have a VIA chipset, and I've been using this mainboard in many projects. For the RAM, well, let's have a look what we have. This is a 256 megabyte DDR400 module, and for storage we're using a SSD from SanDisk with a capacity of 32 gigabytes, again using the ID to SATA adapter from StarTech. I follow my usual process, loading the BIOS defaults. On this mainboard I need to lock in the memory speed to 200 megahertz. I disable some resources that we're not using, especially under Windows 98. That can be quite important. And then, installing Windows 98, that worked without any dramas. The VIA chipset drivers also installed perfectly fine. But after I install the ATI Radeon drivers, we're getting some issues. And I tried a few things. One of them was going into the BIOS, and I changed the HEP from 8x to 4x, and initially that sorted everything out. I had a beautiful looking desktop. And just like under Windows XP, as soon as I install the Sound Blaster drivers, I'm having issues. Here we're using the Sound Blaster Live. This is my go-to Windows 98 sound card, model number CT4830. I've been using the sound card in so many Windows 98 projects. It's never given me any issues, so I'm really not sure what's going on. When things don't work out and you want something that's ultra compatible, ticks all the boxes with the standards, go with something from Intel, and this is nothing other than the Intel Pentium 4. Love it or hate it, there's a lot of hate out there, but for retro gaming, these are affordable and really compatible, and just works as long as you check the capacitors that everything is okay in that regard. This one is from Gigabyte. Here we have the model number. It's the GA8PE800. In terms of RAM, we have 256 megabytes of DDR. This machine uses DDR 333, so a little bit slower. The Pentium 4 is running at 2.53 gigahertz. No SATA ports on this board, only IDE, but that's all we need. We have a heap of PCI slots and a GPU, of course. If it has a BIOS, we will flash it. This board came with BIOS version F3, and on the Gigabyte website we have BIOS version F9. So I flashed it. Again, the same process, load the turbo or recommended defaults, and then I disable all the onboard resources like Ethernet, onboard audio. We don't need the serial ports, we don't need the parallel ports, and everything installed perfectly fine. We are installing the Intel chipset drivers without any issues. The ATI Radeon video card drivers also no issues whatsoever. And for the sound, we're using the Audigy Live. Again, no problems this time. Everything worked as expected. Make sure you go into the device manager and turn on DMA mode so you get decent performance with storage. I then ran the ATTO disk benchmark. I wanted to see what this chipset can do, and here we go. Here we have the results. We're getting around a little bit over 70 megabytes a second for writing and just under 90 megabytes a second for reading, so those are excellent numbers. A few tweaks: tweaking the mixer settings, muting all the inputs, and also setting the sample rate conversion to high quality. And then, we are ready to test some benchmarks. Here we have GL Quake, and oh my, that looks so much better compared to what we saw under Windows 98. So at 640 by 480 over 300 FPS, and then as we ramp up the resolution, yes, the performance drops, but even at 1600 by 1200, we're getting 65 FPS, which is excellent. Here we have expendable, and again, very good performance. At the low resolutions, we are CPU limited, but then as we go higher, we can see the video card starts to struggle a little bit. 1600 by 1200 is pushing it, but 1280 by 1024 perfectly playable. Let's test some eye candy features. In the driver, you can enable 16x anisotropic filtering. Here you have some footage to show you what that looks like. And here we have the benchmark results. Basically, you're not losing much. It's a driver setting I would turn on for all the games. Just set it to 16x AF and you will not lose much performance at all. Anti-aliasing is a lot more demanding. I configured the driver with 4x anti-aliasing. At 640 by 480, not much of an impact, but as we increase the resolution, performance quickly goes down. And 1280 by 1024, we're already under the 60 FPS mark. So if you want to play with 4x anti-aliasing, maybe up to 1024 by 768. But it's nice to see that even on this budget video card, we can use some of these eye candy features with older games. I had a closer look in the driver and we can enable smart shader effects such as turning the image into black and white, inverse the color, or even cycling in RGB. So yeah, not quite sure how useful this is, but it's there if you're interested. Let's test nGlide, which requires a DirectX 9 GPU, which we have. And here we can see Unreal. So firstly, it's working fine, but I noticed some big stutters and pauses. The machine was definitely struggling. And I've noticed this in the past. It has to do with the RAM. Now, 256 megabytes of RAM is heaps for Windows 9.8, but for nGlide it's not enough. So I upgraded the memory. We have a 512 megabyte DDR400 module. Remember, the Pentium 4 on this machine runs at 333. So let's see the result. We can see Unreal now runs a lot smoother. It's not silky smooth 60 FPS, but it runs fairly well. And I also tested Screamer 4x4. This game supports the Glide API, and yeah, again, it runs okay. But of course, this game supporting OpenGL and Direct 3D, it's better you use those options because you don't go through nGlide, which is a wrapper that converts between two APIs. And now let's test another game that I haven't played before. It is Gunmetal, and yeah, really weird. This game did not launch for me under Windows XP, which is weird. It's another release from GOG. I installed it under Windows 10 and then copied the folder across onto the retro PC, and under Windows XP it just wouldn't launch. Very strange. But under 98 it works just fine. Released in 2003, so the same year as the video card. Developed by Rage Software. That's the same developers that made Incoming, and you can definitely see where it's coming from. The colors, very colorful, big focus on the graphics, and yeah, you play a robot, but you can switch into a jet, so you can smoothly transition between running around and then flying around. So really, yeah, quite impressive. And this is a plain arcade shooter, no training, no trading you have to do, straight into the action, so I really enjoyed that. It's running at 800 by 600. I have enabled 16x AF in the drivers, and it is struggling with the frame rate, so the 9600 SE is not a good match for this game, but it gave me a good idea. The controls out of the box, WASD and the mouse, so that worked really well. I didn't have to spend a lot of time remapping the keys, but the controls feel a little bit jerky. Maybe this is a game better played with a controller or a joystick, and you have various weapons. And yeah, all in all, really enjoyed it. I played the first 2 missions and had a blast. Remember when we tested Thief 2 under Windows XP and I was surprised that the fog was working? Well, here we are under Windows 98 and no fog. That is so interesting. So it seems to be something, a limitation that's not really with the video card, but with the driver. So something going on with the Windows 98 drivers. Now, I do remember hearing about some tweaking utility where you can enable that feature in certain driver versions, but the details escape me. If you know what I'm talking about, please leave your comments down below. Yeah, I would love to investigate a little bit further, but this was interesting. So if you wanna get table fog with ATI Radeon cards, use XP instead of 98. Maybe it will make your games work just fine. Starting with this video and to help out the PC retro gaming community, I have uploaded the BIOS files, the drivers, the manuals to all these 4 mainboards onto the philscomputerlab.com website, because you never know when these manufacturers pull support. So this is one of these projects that look quite straightforward at first, but then things go wrong and you end up with 4 different systems and swapping out parts, trying to figure out what's going on. A theme in this project is issues with VIA chipset mainboards from AMD. So that is a little bit unexpected. In the past, I didn't have too many issues, especially with that Socket 754 board I've been using in many projects. But it seems that the combination of a VIA chipset, maybe with the ATI Radeon and then PCI sound cards, there seems to be something that was just not working really well with this combination. So one of the takeaways could be that if you go with an Intel chipset mainboard, the compatibility is a little bit better. At least that's what I saw in this video. Both the ASRock mainboard and the Gigabyte mainboard with the Socket 775 and Socket 478, they had fantastic compatibility, no issues whatsoever. In terms of performance, don't expect too much. With Windows XP retro gaming, games like Doom 3, Far Cry, released in 2003, 2004, they are just too much for this video card. But older games, they will run perfectly fine. So it could be of interest if you're trying to build a hybrid machine with a little bit of Windows XP, but a larger focus on Windows 98. Windows 98 performance was excellent in Direct 3D as well as OpenGL. nGlide was pushing the limits a little bit, but because it's DirectX 9 compatible, at least it runs. You might not get that great performance out of it, however. Another interesting takeaway is the table fog under Windows XP. That worked beautifully in Thief 2, but Windows 98, no support. So that was quite interesting, and it's nice for me to have confirmed that. I was always curious about that aspect, and now I've seen it with my own eyes. So yeah, there you go. When you run into issues with a project, sometimes there are more takeaways, more lessons to be learned. The 2 games that we looked at in more detail, X turned out not to be my cup of tea. I'm more into the arcade, the space shooter type games, the space trading. It's just a little bit too time consuming for me. I don't have too much time, so I want to enjoy my time and have some instant gratification, so to speak. The other game, Gunmetal, that seems much more up my alley. The performance was a little bit struggling. The 9600 SE is not quite powerful enough, but we will soon be looking at a much higher end video card from 2003. So stay tuned, I might retest the same games. So yeah, LGA 775 and the good old Pentium 4 to the rescue. They saved this project from being a total disaster. And I want to hear from you guys. What is your experience with VIA chipsets, AMD mainboards and Radeon graphics? Are there any compatibility issues? Yeah, let's talk about it. Another aspect I want to talk about is recently I asked you guys through YouTube community, I opened a poll and I wanted to see what sort of content do you find most interesting, and Windows 98 won the race, followed by DOS, Windows XP very closely, and the modern stuff not so much. So I hear you loud and clear. Windows 98, DOS, Windows XP, all these topics really interest me. So yeah, that's beautiful. I will just continue doing what I'm doing in that regard, and I will try to tone it down with the more modern stuff. I have 2 more mini PCs that I need to review. They have already arrived in the lab, so I have to finish those videos, but then going forward, I want to tone it down. Maybe do a mini PC or something modern, you know, every few months or something like that. I can also see you like the video tutorials that helps you how to set up retro PCs. There are already plenty of resources on the website, benchmark packs, DOS starter packs and so on, but there's always more that can be done. And also emulation, got a few comments, DOSBox, PCM, 86box, because yeah, old retro parts, some of them are really desirable and prices have gone up. So emulation is definitely something that will keep this hobby alive and also help spread the word and get new blood into this awesome community. So guys, if you're still watching this, thank you so much. This was a long video, and yeah, it was quite frustrating at first, but I'm glad I persevered and kept testing new mainboards, because yeah, I actually got quite a few interesting nuggets of information out of this, some good experience under the belt. And yeah, so I actually ended up really enjoying this time, and yeah, gotta love that Pentium 4, love it or hate it. It's a really fantastic platform, very compatible, and definitely will continue playing around with the good old Pentium 4. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Leave comments down below, give it a thumbs up, share the video with your friends, and do check your notifications. Hit that bell button, click on all so you get updates for new releases. And that's it. I shall see you soon with another one.